In 1997, the brothers Ulf and Bo Anderson founded the game development company Grin and went on to create their own game engine, the Diesel engine, for their first game, Ballistics, a futuristic racing game released on the PC in 2001 and ported to arcades the next year. Grin ended up using their Diesel engine for each of their 8 published video games, with the exception being Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter 2. In 2008, Square Enix hired Grin to develop a Final Fantasy spin-off called Fortress, but after 6 months of development, Square cancelled the project entirely without paying Grin, because they were concerned over the quality of the game. This, in addition to other delayed payments from too many publishers, as Grin stated later, caused the company to go bankrupt and close their offices in August of 2009. The owners of Grin, Ulf and Bo Anderson, along with Simon Wiklund, founded a new studio within the same year. Under the new name Overkill Software, they launched their first project, a 4-player cooperative multiplayer first-person shooter with the name of Payday the Heist on the 18th of October 2011. The game was somewhat successful, selling over 700,000 copies by October of 2012 and receiving generally positive reviews. Overkill wanted to make a sequel to Payday the Heist, but was lacking the funds to do so on their own. The Swedish publisher Starbreeze Studios stepped in and acquired Overkill Software in 2012, allowing them to start development on the game's sequel. But this wasn't quite what actually happened. Here's a quote from an Eurogamer article written in 2019. Starbreeze took in money from investors with a rights issue and bought Overkill with shares. But according to people familiar with the deal, Starbreeze was in such a terrible financial position that these shares were essentially worthless. And so the owners of Overkill were paid with so many worthless shares, they became the majority owners of Starbreeze by default. In 2012, just a couple of months after the launch of Syndicate, Starbreeze announced it had acquired Overkill. But this announcement was misleading. The reality was, Overkill took over Starbreeze. In practice, Starbreeze was given away, one source says. On the other hand, both Starbreeze and Overkill would probably not have survived without the merger, and Payday 2 would have never been made. In July of 2013, a closed beta for players that pre-ordered the game was released. You could either pre-order the standard edition, which contained the game, a beta key, and some exclusive cosmetics referred to as the loot bag DLC for $40 US, or you could buy the Career Criminal edition, priced at $50 US, in which you received an additional beta key to give out to a friend, the in-game soundtrack as downloadable MP3s, and a permanent discount on purchases made with in-game currency. Unfortunately, I could not find any definitive answer as to how high this discount is by googling. Therefore, I asked 3 of my friends who do not own this edition of the game, which you haven't been able to purchase since the game launched, unless you pay an absurd amount of money to scalpers, to compare their in-game prices to my own, since I did buy the Career Criminal edition back in the day. We used a sample size of 3 different items to compare the prices with. An older weapon, the Thanatos, a newer weapon, the Airbow, and the cost of buying a mission called Rats on the normal difficulty, which is purchased using your offshore money rather than your spending cash. We'll get to what the difference between the two is when we discuss the economy of Payday 2. Anyways, the prices of my 3 friends were the exact same, while all of my prices were exactly 20% lower than theirs. So not only is the discount still a thing after 9 years, but it's also a whopping 20% off of every single purchase made with in-game money. This is pretty wild to think about. Not only that I and other owners of this edition didn't even know about the discount, but that it didn't stir up any controversy at all, considering how one of the most infamous moments in the game's history revolves around the pay-to-win loot box mechanic, which didn't give you nearly as much of an advantage as this does. I am pretty certain that, for one, it only didn't blow up because people simply didn't know about it. I mean, I literally had to compare prices by myself because it is impossible to find the exact percentage of the discount anywhere online. And on the other hand, I am close to 100% sure that if such an edition were to be released in the current gaming landscape, there will be an extreme outrage from fans and journalists alike. The aforementioned beta featured 7 out of the 12 missions available at launch on the 13th of August 2013. The missions in this game are also called heists, which is how I will be referring to them for the remainder of this video. In the beta, the highest attainable level was 25, as opposed to the final game in which the maximum level was 100. Another perk of pre-ordering Payday 2 was that the first post-launch DLC didn't cost anything for you. For everyone else, it was priced at $4 US. This was the Armored Transport DLC, and it came out on the 14th of November of 2013. Almost exactly 3 months after the game's initial release. It featured 5 maps, with identical objectives but different layouts. The goal is always to break into an armored transport and steal its contents. But there was also a secret mission you could unlock by finding a specific item inside of the transport. This was later changed to be a mission you could simply select from the main menu. The secret map was called the Train Heist, in which you unironically steal turrets from Team Fortress 2 out of an armored train. At this point in time, the frag grenades that were introduced in this DLC were the only available throwables, but more of them were added over time, including but not limited to throwing knives, Molotov cocktails and flashbangs. Beyond this point, I will not be going through every DLC, but merely talk about updates that introduce key features throughout the game's history, which coincidentally happens to be the Infamy update that happened a month later on the 22nd of January 2014. This update allowed you to reset your level to 0 in exchange for $200 million of your offshore money. You were able to do this a grand total of 5 times. For each time you unlocked an exclusive cosmetic mask, an increase of 5% to your experience point gain, and the most notable benefit is that advancing tiers in your skill trees cost 10% less points, each reset after the first one applying to one of the 4 available skill trees. This point cost was later changed to be applied to all skill trees after resetting your level the very first time. Another month after that, on the 27th of February, a new highest difficulty was added to the game, Death Wish. This difficulty setting was much harder than the previous highest difficulty, Overkill. The update also came with a notorious new cosmetic for players who managed to complete every single heist on Death Wish. This was an item of great prestige for quite some time, until the game slowly experienced power creep to the point where it wasn't all that difficult anymore. Throughout the rest of 2014, we received the first new characters that weren't part of the original 4 heists featured in the first game. Sniper rifles that could penetrate walls, multiple types of shotgun ammunition, and of course, new weapons and heists. Until October 16, that is. This is the date on which the first ever Crime Fest started. The Crime Fest is an annual event that lasts a week and features content patches on every single day of that week. On the 5th day of the Crime Fest, the developers added perk decks, which will shape the way the game is being played for the rest of its existence. Perk decks are basically like classes from role-playing games, on top of the already existing skill trees. They range from enhancing your armor, to letting you dodge bullets, to enhancing your stealth abilities. We'll discuss all of them in depth at a later point in the video. This update was huge, but the next day, October 21st, had a similarly big impact on the game. It came with a new community favorite map, where we have to rescue one of the beloved original heisters that got caught by the FBI in between the events of the first and second game. For the first and last time in the game's history. This update also added an entirely new skill tree, the Fugitive, and another perk deck. Once again, I will be discussing everything gameplay related in a later chapter of the video. On the next day, they made John frickin' Wick a playable character in Payday 2. This and the collaboration with the game Hotline Miami in the same month kickstarted the developers' rampage to absorb every fictional, high-profile gangster into the playable cast of Payday 2. While 2014 set a precedent for how the game is meant to be played and how exactly the developers were going to produce content for the game, 2015 marks one of the worst years in the Payday franchise's history that compromised a lot of trust and respect the fans had for the team at Overkill/Starbreeze. The beginning of 2015 came with an update to the Infamy system. Not much changed, but you are now able to reset 25 times. Each time comes with a cosmetic reward and an increase in experience point gain. After a falling out between the Anderson brothers following the release of Payday 2, Ulf Anderson announced his departure from the company after selling his shares to his brother Bo on the 4th of May. Ulf had reportedly suffered from the effects of burnout and not shown up to work for several months at this point. Him and Simon Wiklund then went on to found their own game development company, 10 Chambers Collective, to make their own game with the title GTFO. During the second iteration of the annual Crime Fest event, or more precisely on October 15, the first day of the event, shit hit the fan immediately. After vehemently guaranteeing that Payday 2 will never feature microtransactions for over 2 years, Starbreeze seems to have changed their minds, bringing a nuclear fallout of backlash upon themselves. To open these saves, you had to buy a specific drill that only applies to that specific save through Steam for $2.49. Unfortunately, Starbreeze did not stop at funny cosmetics, but also decided to give some of them a small stat boost that were otherwise unobtainable via normal means. Players who spent money on weapon skins had a small but definite in-game advantage over players who did not. After this 5D chess update that compromised the integrity of the company and scarred the reputation of the game to this date, they remedied the severe blunder on the 18th of December by adding stat boosts to the game that you can apply to any weapon. therefore rendering the purchase of the cosmetics entirely optional as they should be. From a gameplay perspective, this fix was perfectly fine and players could simply move on. But the damage done to the game's reputation was irreversible, and the effects of this incident can still be felt nearly 7 years later. A lot of people I know quit the game entirely when this occurred, and never even bothered to look back to notice how the game had been fixed shortly after. Besides Starbreeze publishing the game Dead by Daylight, developed by Behavior Interactive on the 14th of June 2016, nothing out of the ordinary happened that year, until Hoxton's housewarming party. An event that, by all metrics aside from its name, is basically the third iteration of the Crime Fest. At this point, very perceptive viewers may be noticing a trend here. This string of updates added a very useful new throwable, the Flashbang, and a new currency called Continental Coins, which is a reference to the money used within the world of crime in the John Wick trilogy. This currency can be used to purchase weapon modifications you didn't already earn through the random loot drops at the end of each completed heist. It also added a new enemy type to the game that can heal other enemies. The main attraction of the event, however, was the introduction of 2 new difficulties. One of them was designed to bridge the gap between the previous 2 highest difficulties, and the other one was the new highest difficulty called One Down. Just like Death Wish 2 years prior, this difficulty tries to account for the power creep introduced since then. It additionally features a new mechanic unique to One Down. Like the name implies, you can only go down once before you go into custody and your teammates need to trade a hostage for your freedom, as opposed to the 3 times you're allowed to go down on other difficulty settings. The next year was a much busier and arguably the most important one in the history of Payday 2. In April of 2017, a new game mode called Crime Spree was introduced, and it managed to utterly break the game's economy, inflating every single of its currencies into oblivion. We'll discuss the fine details of this game mode in depth in chapter 6. 2 months later, on the 8th of June 2017, Overkill Software made an announcement that would single-handedly catapult Payday 2 into the mainstream, and with a peak of roughly 250,000 concurrent players, it comfortably made its way into the top 10 most actively played games on Steam, where it would remain for quite some time. They had announced that they would be giving away a whopping 5 million copies of Payday 2. Since at this point, the game featured a metric ton of downloadable content, all of it costing well over $200 combined, the studio decided to release the Payday 2 Ultimate Edition 4 days after their big announcement. This edition featured the base game and every DLC released up until that point, obviously excluding any exclusive DLC such as the previously mentioned pre-order bonuses. The Ultimate Edition was being sold for $45 at the time. In order to explain the next notable event in the story, I will have to go on a lengthy tangent that may seem like it has absolutely no reason to be in here, but let me assure you that this will somehow loop back to Payday 2. Back in February of 2016, Ethan and Hila Klein, or more predominantly known as H3H3 Productions, posted a video called The Big, The Bold, The Beautiful, in which they reacted to a video made by Matt Hosseinzadeh. There is absolutely no way I pronounced that correctly. He is more commonly known as Matt Hoss, so I'll just go with that. Either way, the content of this video was primarily misogynistic garbage disguised as fitness-themed comedy. Then in April of the same year, Mr. Hoss filed a civil action lawsuit for copyright infringement against Ethan and Hila Klein. Fellow YouTuber Philip DeFranco managed to raise $130,000 via crowdfunding to help pay for the Klein's legal fees. They then announced they would deposit that money into an escrow account handled by a third-party law firm. The account was called the Fair Use Protection Account, or FUPA for short. It was to be used to help the clients and other online creators be able to legally defend themselves and by extension, fair use as a whole. 1 year later, on the 23rd of August 2017, Ethan Klein announced on his Twitter account that they had finally won the lawsuit against Matt Hoss. Now, why did I tell you about this? In November of 2017, the H3H3 Character Pack DLC was released. It featured Ethan and Hila as new playable characters and it also brought us the long-awaited usable vape as part of the DLC's tag team perk deck. The most interesting thing about it though is that all of the profits this DLC generated were donated to H3H3 Productions to help fund their legal costs and their fight for fair use. Most, if not all of this money was deposited into the previously mentioned escrow fund. In the spring of 2018, or more precisely on the 1st of March, significant changes were made to the highest difficulty. One down, the name-giving mechanic of only being able to go down once, was stripped from the difficulty itself and added as an optional toggle usable on any of the 7 selectable difficulty settings. Furthermore, enemy health values were lowered by around 30% to account for the removal of a skill called Specialized Killing, which increased the damage of silenced weapons by 30%. Making other barrel modifications a lot more useful. They also ramped up the hit points of the obligatory tank unit, the bulldozers, by quite a bit, and introduced 2 new types of bulldozers, a much tankier version of the previously introduced medic, and a minigun variant that has twice as much hit points as the other dozer units. This change was generally not very well received, as you are virtually required to run very high DPS loadouts, or at least one very high DPS weapon to efficiently deal with these units. While most people were already doing that, it did decrease build variety a fair bit. The difficulty also ended up being renamed from 1 down to death sentence. The person responsible for a lot of questionable changes to the game was the lead game designer Jules Marquez, who was somewhat disliked for his strange approach in balancing. He often ended up being the go-to scapegoat for the community when things within the game went wrong. To quickly name an example of nonsensical balance changes greenlit by Mr. Marquez, I will point towards 2 adjustments that happened back in 2017. Light machine guns, which were admittedly in a very bad spot, got buffed tremendously. We'll compare 2 metrics in this example. Ammo pickup, which defines how many bullets every enemy drops after you kill them, and how many headshots it takes to kill a heavy Zeal unit, which is sort of the default enemy on the highest difficulty. The LMGs ended up with an average ammo pickup of 20 to 25. And were able to kill heavy Zeal units with 2 headshots. Shortly after this, they nerfed assault rifles equipped with a DMR kit. They were quite strong, but required the user to have really good aim, since the ammo pickup was only high enough to sustain itself if the vast majority of your shots hit their target. DMRs had an average ammo pickup of 2 to 4 bullets and were able to one-shot heavy Zeal units with headshots. At this point, DMRs were already outclassed by the newly buffed LMGs. But that seemingly was not enough, so the ammo pickup of DMRs was nerfed down to 0.9 bullets per kill. This meant that even with flawless aim, you would slowly lose ammo. Throw the tankier special enemies into the mix, and you have no chance to sustain your ammunition pool without resorting to ammo bags. This was at a point in the game where basically everyone ran medic bags instead, and only weapons that could sustain themselves without extra equipment were considered good. This is pretty much still the case to this date, but some weapons with incredible damage per second potential weren't bringing ammo bags. But we'll get into the gameplay specifics in more detail in a later chapter. I'm bringing this up now because Jules Marquez ended up leaving the company in October of 2018. He then founded his own game development company, Limitless Games, to develop Ascendants Rising, a co-op action RPG that was a complete failure. The game peaked at 20 concurrent players in July of 2021 and has been sitting at an average of 0 online players at any given time. Since then, there has been absolutely no news coming from Limitless Games, but it is assumed they are still working on Ascendants Rising as it is only in early access. My friend Bay1K also made an entire video covering this topic, so if that interests you, there will be a link to it in the description. The supposed final content update in Payday 2's lifecycle released on the 2nd of November 2018 with a brand new heist called The White House. But it also gave birth to a series of elaborate riddles referred to as The Secret that had to be solved by the community in order to unlock a hidden cutscene that would signal the end of the Payday 2 storyline. The Secret was first solved on stream by a content creator called RandomKenny, 2 days after its initial release, on the 4th of November at 3:38 PM Central European Time. Later the same day, a user named Kisi13 posted a video of him and his crew, Combat Wombat, Jigu and Reaver, beating the Secret on the highest difficulty as the first team to do so. At some point in 2018, Starbreeze sold the publishing rights to Dead by Daylight back to its development studio Behavior Interactive. This did help alleviate their financial situation, but nothing could prepare them for what was about to happen. After 3 years of development, Overkill's The Walking Dead released on the 4th of November 2018, and it was, and still is, arguably one of the worst AAA games ever released. It is an unfinished, unoptimized, everything steaming pile of garbage, which obviously reflected in the only roughly 100,000 copies sold. As of right now, both Raid World War II and Overkill's The Walking Dead share an average concurrent player count of 0. Just a month after this disaster occurred, Starbreeze had to file for reconstruction and Bo Anderson stepped down as the CEO of the company. And just a month before this occurrence, Bo Anderson had sold all of his shares of Starbreeze for about 1.9 million US dollars. This piqued the interest of the Swedish Economy Crime Authority, which ended up raiding various locations including the Starbreeze headquarters. Anderson was taken into custody under suspicion of insider trading, but was later cleared of any charges as it was discovered that his bank had pressed him into selling the shares. In order to rescue the company from bankruptcy, Starbreeze ended up selling the publishing rights to System Shock 3, Psychonauts 2, and their share of the Ruva Interactive, which would subsequently be absorbed by Rockstar Games. But they also returned to making paid downloadable content for Payday 2 to help fund the development of its sequel in October of 2019. Since then, basically nothing notable aside from one update has happened. On the 11th of November 2020, the third iteration of the Infamy update was released. It allowed players to reset the level up to 500 times, rewarding various different cosmetics up until the 100th reset. I was already done with this part of the video until the new major update to Payday 2 came out in May of 2022. May, I introduced to you Infamy 4.0. This update allows you to passively gain experience points without having to reset your level. Although with this method, you have to gain 23% more experience points per quote-unquote reset when compared to resetting your level, which is still an option. And that is the history of Payday 2 as of right now.